Greetings, dear listeners. Today, we're talking about the film Pod People. Wait, Pod People. Pod.
I'm coming in from the Sunshine Chopper. Ben Sheets here.
I'm not making any sense, Matisse Van Rossum.
And I'm Cleveland Mosher. How's it going, y'all?
Pretty good. So this week was my pick, and
Because we lied once again about
We did.
Rock
Yes.
and Roll Nightmare.
unforeseen circumstances came up, leading to that being delayed a little bit, but that's okay, because we get to cover the movie Pontypool, which is one of my favorite zombie movies of the last 10-15 years. I think it's fantastic, and I'm probably going to be spending the whole podcast defending it and singing its praises. Essentially, the premise, I guess you could say, in a way, it's what if the War of the Worlds broadcast was real? Take that, fictionalized radio play, and what if something crazy like that on the airwaves was real? So essentially, this shock jock radio host, Grant Mazzy, moves to a small town where he is taking the radio position on an early morning program. While they're doing the show, some things happen, and things go awry, and
Things go awry elsewhere.
yes,
To be clear.
Yes.
Like, during his coverage, he starts hearing about, mob occurrences.
and more strange things come in for him to report on. I don't know how into this I should get before we talk about it a little bit more.
I think we can just start breaking it down from the beginning. There's enough, good
Yeah,
sequences.
yeah, I
throughout
think
the
that's a
film
good call.
that We can just cover it front to back.
So I really love how this movie starts with the dialogue itself. It almost reminds me of the opening of Candyman in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah, kind of.
Stephen McHattie has such a booming voice. It's a perfect radio voice, honestly.
Oh, yeah.
True.
And he's telling the story about this missing cat, and it's very cryptic and kind of spooky. It kind of really just sets the tone really well for the rest of the movie.
It does. I enjoyed the intro sequence very much. I'm kind of a sucker for that audio wave aesthetic, and it's implemented very well. I like how the globing aspect sort of pulls out from the center of his words. It reflects the events of the film quite nicely. It kind of cues you off towards the end to think that it's going to be conspiracy related in some way, because he starts tying in the meaning of the town Pontypool, and he very quickly skews off towards the JFK assassination.
Yeah, and I mean, the way he talks in the first leg of the movie, it seems like his original job was doing conspiracy radio, essentially.
Alex Jones-esque sort of stuff, which
Take no prisoners.
Yeah, that's his tagline.
which I thought was great. It's a great lead character to have in your film, this Alex Jones-esque radio host who got fired for being a little bit too crazy, a little bit too extreme, and so now he's stuck in a small town doing small town radio. Very fun. It's a
great
fun
premise. Yeah,
definitely not a quote protagonist as I would see. But very fun, and definitely a compelling character.
he does a fantastic job, I think, in this movie too.
Yeah, front to back. I mean, this is a dialogue-driven film. Almost the entirety of the film takes place within the radio station, where it's driven by external information coming in. And just the viewer is trapped sort of the entire film trying to disseminate the information and figure out what is actually going on. And yeah, that's where some of my concerns with the film come up, but they're very minor.
It falls into a subgenre of horror minimalism that I really like. It leaves a lot to the imagination. In a lot of ways, it increases the tension because there's a lot of unknowns in the same way. It's obvious that the budget for this movie was very low, but I think it works despite that because it is played out so minimalistically.
It really helped because they used their budget well where they had it. The set is great. The camera work is quite good. The production quality of the film is quite high. Like it feels very clean.
Yes.
And it needed to because it's so audio driven that you really want that fidelity. It definitely like helps put you in the moment, and that film requires it in a way that generally like I think a veneer of any kind would have hampered it, or like a low production aesthetic would have harmed the film. I was very okay with it like having a nice glossy look, even though in most cases I wouldn't feel that way. Like films like Bug, for instance, are I think a decent comparative. They touch on similar
in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Bug has a much more amateuristic sort of like approach, whereas this film is a lot more clean and crisp. And I think in this film, it pays better. Bug is trying to do something different. It's a little bit more about like paranoia, and that's more of an effective thing. But here, it is keying in on the words themselves.
Yeah, and I think the strength of the dialogue really helps give it that production quality. A lot of times,
yeah. I mean, if your film is about evil words and your dialogue is bad, you have problems.
Yeah, absolutely. What it comes down to is it turns out this is a zombie outbreak, but it's not your typical zombies.
No.
It's
It is absolutely not.
No, it's not. I wasn't expecting that twist. I was cool with it for a while.
I think that you and I were probably not cool with it at the exact same moment. I think that the problems came up for us at the same time.
Probably.
I think it sounds to me like they were larger problems for you than they were for me. I did have a problem with it, but anyway, we're talking around it. Let's just get to it.
Well, okay. So one of the things I hate is in the advertising and whatnot for this movie, they call them zombies, but they're not really zombies in a traditional sense.
No.
The idea is it's a virus that's spread through the English language, essentially, and it's turning people into feral.
Yeah. As soon as you explain it, that's when it's kind of problematic for me. Like, as soon as you say
I agree.
it's a virus that's spreading through the English language, it's like, ooh, wait, what? Like, up until you say it, when you have the framing all around it, it's fine. Like, and it's cool and it's kind of spooky. But as soon as you call it what it is, it's like, oh man, that's I don't know how I feel about that.
I don't agree with that though, because I think
it's
it's a very unusual premise, but it's played out in seriousness and with some weight, and I think it has its own concrete set of rules, and for those reasons I think it works.
All right, well, let me break down.
I mean, it has rules, and that's good. I agree with that.
But yeah,
is it a problem because it's far-fetched, or
no? My problem is because
it's
is when you bring in Dr. Exposition and explain it, it sounds weird and goofy. And
it takes the fear away.
Whereas when you just imply it and are sort of dancing around what it is, but leaving enough clues for people to figure it out, it's sinister. And I was really loving that up until
the doctor straight up just explained it.
Up until Dr. Exposition, because when he says it in words, it sounds ridiculous. It sounds silly.
Yeah, it doesn't sound scary.
And that's when I stopped taking it seriously. Yeah. And from that point to the end of the movie, I couldn't take anything that was happening seriously.
Now, that being said, I still enjoyed a lot of the things that happened.
Everything up to that point I thought was really good build-up.
For me, it stopped being a horror movie at that moment. And it was gripping me, and I was horrified up until that moment.
See, the weird thing is, like, if this was a normal zombie movie and Dr. Exposition came in to explain zombies, we wouldn't really bat an eye, because that happens in so many zombie movies.
That's not a justification, though. Like, at a certain point, you know your zombie lore. You don't need the exposition. If you can figure out what's happening based on what you're seeing in the film, that's always better than having somebody explain it to you. Like, I agree that movies like this have exposition, but I think that that's a problem, that they have the exposition dumps. In this particular case, it turns the premise from something very cool and spooky and esoteric into something silly and like, oh man, what if there was like a virus that, like, when you say certain words, it like makes you go crazy, man.
But the words are the virus.
But the words are the virus. Like,
no, that's a cool piece of, that's an interesting piece of commentary. I like the concept of like a mind virus and like a thought that like fucks with your head. Like,
just,
that's great.
As soon as you start trying to talk about it and explain it rationally, you sound like a stoner.
Well, it's an inherently absurd premise,
right?
But
so don't explain anything and just let me see the horror that comes from it, because when it's doing that, I think it's so effective. I was really hooked for all of like the first couple of acts in the build-up because I thought it was really fantastic. It's when you explain it that it's like, oh wait, this is actually silly.
I've seen this movie several times at this point, and I think it works for me despite that because, well, partially because I've seen it several times and I don't have that exposition twist almost because it's clear from the start and you don't have to think too much about the surprise of the dump as much, I guess. I can understand it being troublesome on your first watch, but like once you've bought into that and you see how it goes from the beginning, there's a lot of contextual.
I mean, the majority of the film is built around the tension of not knowing. I think of the beginning section.
I think it's a very clever premise. I'm not denying that by any means. It's just the way that they try to explain it to us via exposition makes it harder for me to take it seriously as something spooky and clever, whereas when they weren't doing that, I thought it was profoundly more effective because it's supposed to be a mind virus, so let it infect the viewer in the same way without having to tell you what it is.
But at the same time,
I think it's doing a good job of that until they do tell you what it is.
My other point on that subject is also it feels sort of artificially deep to me because let's actually like dig into that concept, right? The words that you're saying carry a virus on them that affects your mind. How? What does that mean? Like I say a word and then suddenly you are infected by the because the doctors
explain that a little bit.
It's spread by saying the word, but not by contact, not by blood.
Said and understood as the word.
So is it a virus? Like, how does that operate? How do you become infected by understanding a word? How does that work?
Do we need to know how it works?
Yes, because
it's Inception, man.
Because otherwise it's not a finished thought. Like, otherwise it is not complete. And to explain it to that point, but not further, it is just the weirdest spot to stop in the logic of this concept. Because if you're going to leave me on the edge of my seat trying to figure out what is going on, what is happening, to be delivered with something that makes absolutely no sense, that cannot be like put under a lens, because it breaks. There's no way to conceptualize that idea that we're pulling from right now. I'm sure there is. Like, I'm sure there is a cool way you could do it.
I actually have a defense of this. Yeah. Because the way I look at it is I give this example halfway as a joke, half serious. It's fucking Inception, man. You plant an idea and then it grows and then they think they had the idea and they believe it. You know, it's that kind of dumb bullshit. But like when the guy is talking to them on the phone and he's talking about like he's hiding and all of the zombies are like all chanting like something about U-boats. Mm-hmm. If you look at it from the perspective of conspiracy theory and stuff like that, that kind of stuff is a mind virus. Whereas you say it, somebody understands it, it clicks with them, and then they believe it.
Yeah,
it doesn't infect the people who don't understand it because they don't believe it. You know, and from that perspective, I think it's a clever...
It's a cool infection metaphor of your linguistic center of your brain, essentially.
Yeah, and I love that as a metaphor.
Yes, it works well as a metaphor. And I think in terms of how they execute it in the movie, I think it's executed pretty well. The quote-unquote zombies turn into essentially radio beacons where they just repeat whatever is nearby that is making noise in hopes to transmit.
Which is rad.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool.
Right. I just how their brain is broken to begin with is just the part that I'm stuck on.
Like, well, it's the same sort of idea of learning language to begin with. It's the linguistic centers of your brain getting into a feedback loop and it's spreading through that center of your brain.
Right.
Now,
Okay.
why it causes them to vomit up all of their guts if they don't spread the virus to somebody else, that I don't fully understand.
Well, they did.
Some
They did
animation.
say. They did say that they spread it and then kill themselves.
No, sure,
Sure,
yeah,
but-
I got that. I don't really understand why. I thought, from a visual perspective, it was pretty cool when
looked
the
neat.
chick was trying to get into the sound booth the whole time, and then she eventually just vomited her guts all over the glass and died. Like, I think it's cool. I like the idea of, like, the self-destructing zombies. If they don't infect you in time, they just blow up. It's cool. I don't know why it's happening.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily need to
Yeah, I don't
know
really
why.
need to know why.
I don't need to know why, and
Right.
that's generally my problem with the other stuff in the movie is
But-
I don't need to know why.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Just-
I
just
think
don't-
that's very
don't-
fair.
Otherwise-
Try to tell me
because
like,
anime does this a lot too, where they present you, they
always
drop
bring
you
it back
into
to
a world.
anime.
I know, right? But I think this is a valid comparative, because anime very often like drops the viewer into a world without any understanding of what's going on, and then presents you with their rule construct in a left-handed manner. So you're left trying to figure out what is going on, in this environment. I like to use anime in particular for this comparative because lots of thrillers and horror films do this as well, but anime often does it with very, very wacky concepts, like death gods or something wacky. In that format, I'm not expecting the result to make any sense. But
Well-
in this format, I kind of was. I was expecting some kind of, because
I mean, it
when
does-
when it provides you with such obscure data points, like when you start hearing about the zombies like speaking and saying like weird things and weird like conspiratorial stuff, like I was fucking hooked. I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm thinking like, oh, what's gonna happen? And to be clear, I still love the movie after that happened. Like I'm gonna give this movie lots of stars. It's really my only complaint. But when you're expecting to have all of the pieces come together at some point, to have them kind of presented like haphazardly from this doctor
who literally crawls in the window of the radio station in order to hang out, give his exposition dump, and then crawls back out the same window and immediately becomes a zombie.
Well, I
His
do
sole
want to
purpose is
explain that a little
exposition.
bit. They introduce him right at the beginning. He was the doctor who was being swarmed at the beginning.
Right, you hear on the
And,
news that the people are swarming around his practice.
Yeah, and he was giving out too many prescriptions or whatnot. So, at first you'd believe, they were just angry about not getting their
well, because he was
opioids or
under
whatnot.
investigate. They say that on the radio. They say he was under investigation for like giving out prescription.
I appreciate that as somewhat of a red herring as well, because like going into it knowing it's a zombie film, it's like, oh, this doctor has been writing improper prescriptions, is he responsible for the zombie outbreak? I think that is a nice red herring, but then my problem is with how they actually physically introduce his character into the movie, what they do with him, and then how they have him exit,
So,
which I think is very
His exiting was a bit of an issue. I liked how he just kind of crawled in. I thought that was kind of fun. I overall too, like, I didn't like how he was used as a mechanism, but I did like the doctor character.
The thing is, like, I think it's almost one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing. Because, as you were saying, you would like more rules to how that happens. And, like, with such a limited perspective and single location, it's not super easy to describe some of that. And if you leave it too esoteric, people are just going to be like, this it makes no sense.
It's definitely a hard line to walk. Like, I'll absolutely give that to the movie. It is not an easy balance to maintain.
The thing is like I felt like when I was watching this movie that I was getting there. Like I was picking up the information that I needed to from the film, and I was putting the pieces together properly, and then when the doctor comes in and just does the exposition,
it takes it from you.
It almost, yeah, exactly. It gave me kind of a feeling of like, oh, well, I was on my way to working that out myself. Like, why'd you just say it? It sounds dumb when you say it.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it was doing such a good job of taking this very abstract, esoteric concept of a mind virus that's transmitted by language and actually making me get it without giving away any of that information And it's like, well, maybe people will be too dumb to get it, so exposition here for a while. That's what it felt like to me. And I've brought that up as problems in previous films. It's just an issue for me.
Because again, like, the concept is quite scary, and I think that there's even like a way that you can address the concept and reveal the concept in dialogue in a way that maintains the fear. But with the doctor, like, just being like, oh, yes, reading lips. Oh, it's this. Hey, this is what the virus is. And just, like, giving me that, like, that full, like, explanation of it. Oh, and not just saying this is what the virus is, very clearly saying, like, what are his words exactly? Like,
oh, I don't know. It's rambling. But
yeah, one of the things I actually liked about that character is while it is very exposition dumpy, it seems as they write it as so that he's discovering some of that as we're learning it.
Right, he's narrating his discovery.
And, like, so some of the authenticity and reliability of that information can kind of be put into question because of that.
I will say I do appreciate that Stephen McHatty's character, like, when he's saying those things, they have shots of him just, like, looking at him like, what the fuck are you talking about? Which is why I thought that was going to be another red herring, or like a joke or something, or like an oversimplification of what was happening, because of the way they're treating the reveal of that information. I'm like, yes, it is ridiculous. Thank you for validating that. And then they turn around and be like, oh, well, it's ridiculous, but that's also just what's happening.
The way I
was like,
it was like, no. Like, up until that point, there was still, like, some room for the film to just have the doctor be, like, an entirely unreliable narrator, but they go on to prove what he said was right.
Yeah.
Like, and that makes it also problematic. If the doctor was exclusively, like, was an unknown, like, if his facts weren't necessarily validated, the film would leave us with the virus. But it doesn't. The film concludes with that conversation. Once we understand what it is, the rest is largely futile.
I mean, it just changes the arc of the rest of the movie, I think. Because where the first 2/3 or so are about what is going on, what is happening, the last third, once we have that, it turns into a very different movie.
Right, and the problem is it doesn't just change the arc, it changes the tone. For me, it very much so stopped being a horror film once we understood what it was. It came through in the characters for me as well. There are some more, like, comedic moments. The film had comedic moments leading up
throughout, yeah.
I think it does a good job of dark comedy. I do think it becomes a little bit goofier in that third act, and it's a little bit tonally jarring.
Yeah, and again, like, up until that sequence, there were a couple times I was, like, jumping. The jump scares are quite good in this film, by the way. Like, I'm not one for those, and it got me good.
I think some of the best moments are the phone calls with the Sonny Chopper man, whatever that.
Oh, they were great, front to back. I loved all of those.
Ken Loney.
Ken Loney, yeah. I thought that, like, once he's, like, hiding and he's, like, calling them and reporting them, like, that's some legit very spooky stuff. When he talks about, like, what's-her-face's son who is, like, broken into the house and he didn't have any hands and all of his body parts are broken, and he, like, holds his phone up to his mouth, and it's like, it sounds like an infant screaming from inside his lungs or whatever. Yeah. It's like, that's fucking spooky. That's cool. Like, give me more of that. That stuff is, like, the right way to do that Orson Welles radio horror kind of thing. Leave so much up to your imagination, but give you pertinent clues that you can start, like, putting those pieces together yourself. All of that is really well done.
I think they do that very well for, I would say, probably the first 2/3 of the movie or so.
Yeah, it's all of my problems are in the third act, and I have a lot of problems with the
even
third
if
act.
and I feel like most of those problems would have gone away for me if they just cut that monologue from the doctor. If they just trimmed that,
maybe
I would wonder, because I liked a lot of parts in the third act. Like, I
don't like how they cure the mind virus. I don't like that at all.
Yeah,
it does not do anything for me.
Right, because again, like, it's not
kill his kiss thing.
Yeah.
I thought that was so corny.
Yeah, like, it's really tricky. And again, like, we're talking about that line to walk. Oh man, like that's what I mean. Is like the kill his kiss thing. Like, So if you change the word, you escape the feedback loop.
Because you're not, if you understand it as something other than it is, then it no longer has the same infected meaning.
But how do you?
You're literally just substituting it for a completely different.
And how do you enter that feedback loop to begin? I know we've already said it's from like understanding the word,
right?
But that's the mechanism of it. But how does it affect you?
Some words are infected. Like, why does it turn you into a zombie? Yeah. That stuff, I'm okay with that. I'm willing to let my suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, and
in a horror film, I'm willing to let that.
It's one of those things where we have such a limited perspective of what's going on that it doesn't bother me as much. If it was like a World War Z type of thing and they didn't give us this type of explanation,
that would hurt.
You know? But like, since it's so limited and we're in the same world and the same level of understanding as the characters a lot of times, it isn't as problematic for me.
Yeah, the framing of it was so great well into the film. And if I had been left with just, we have a zombie outbreak situation, they are babbling incoherently. You start to see it in people when they enter like a verbal feedback loop.
Yeah, because
they're trying to track the source of their own feedback loop. Instead of like going for brains, they're going for like the source of their feedback loop. They're trying to bounce a radio signal.
You get all of that from the intern turning as well, and I think that is done.
It's awesome.
Well, because also it's like you seem to get a little bit of it with Stephen McHatty's character. Like it seems like he's starting to enter that feedback loop, but he doesn't really. He just kickstarts the interns, and I think all of that is great, and that's before they explain anything.
Well, that's at the same time they explain stuff.
It's immediately before that they start explaining things, because they actually go outside first and then come back in, and that's when the intern goes full zombie.
Yeah, right as he's coming in as well.
Right.
Yeah, it's basically at the same time in the movie.
It happens leading up to that, then the doctor comes in,
we get the first traces of it, and then it kicks into full gear as he's giving that explanation.
And that's when it goes sour.
Yeah.
That's my point. I'm saying the build up to all of that is just stuff that we're seeing without the exposition, and then as soon as they provide the expository context, it becomes less interesting.
Yeah, the result of
they're telling
the
me
intern,
rather than showing me.
Right, when they're telling you while showing, which is almost harder to forgive. Let the sequence with the intern occur, and let me still wonder what's going on for a little bit. Like, and I don't get the opportunity to be left in fear when her, like, after her character.
Like, I think I would have even been more okay with them having a couple of more throwaway characters working in the radio station, just people who could become infected and die, so we can see what's happening rather than being told. Even if those characters' only purpose is for that, I would have preferred it to the exposition.
I don't know about that. I think like the family coming through served that purpose quite well.
Lawrence and the Arabian.
That was great.
Great,
I
front to
loved
back.
That. I thought
front
that was
to back.
awesome.
Like, loved it. Like, very, very funny.
Lawrence is Tony Burgess, who wrote the book and the screenplay.
No shit.
So that was his cameo.
Oh, that's excellent.
I was reading that they also did, at the same time as this movie, they did it as a radio play, a 58-minute radio play.
I'm sure that's a banger. I feel like this would translate pretty well to radio. Yeah,
it's shorter, and I think that aired on the BBC. I'd be curious about that. I'm wondering how much of it translates.
What was the title of the book? It's really good.
Pontypool changes everything.
Yeah,
like
that's
that.
a great title, and it reveals the nature of the virus, right? Like Pontypool changes everything. Like, very cool. I love that. That's great.
Again, it's such a hard line to walk down, because with such a high concept, esoteric premise, you do run the risk of leaving people completely confused and frustrated.
In this case, I think that's a risk you take.
Yeah, it's a horror film. It's a thriller film. Like, being confused and frustrated, like, comes with the territory. And
I think it would have worked either way, but I think it still works for me, at least, in spite of it. And maybe,
don't let me take that from you.
Yeah,
either. Like, and
that's fine.
That's you are.
It worked. Yeah. It was working great for me for over half of the film. It was just the third act where it completely lost me, which is a shame, because I did really like the first two acts.
Also, I feel like Stephen McHattie. did a terrible job of explaining the virus on the radio.
Oh, at the very end?
He did a really bad job of explaining the virus on the radio.
Honestly, that might have been my least favorite part of the movie, is when he's giving this totally rambling nonsense speech to try to, like, save everybody, and it keeps cutting back to the producer, what's her name, Sydney, just, like, smiling and nodding at what he's saying, while the station is crumbling around
What
them.
I love about that, though, is during the credit sequence, they're doing like news broadcasts from afterwards, and they mention how Mazzy was spouting incoherent nonsense on the radio. I like
that. At least they're self-aware about it. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate that immediately after that, the government just drops bombs on the radio station.
Oh, yeah.
They just bomb them.
Yeah. It's fantastic.
That was great. Yeah. It's like, at this point, just end it.
Yeah.
I will say, like, it is true, like, we touched on a good point about self-awareness. Like, the problem that I have with that film and that expo I'm seeing, the film even notes on it. You already said that about Hattie's character, but like him rolling his eyes when the doctor says that, the writers were aware of it. Like,
well, that's the thing. It's
clearly,
like you have your character rolling their eyes about it, but it still somehow doesn't seem like the writers are rolling their eyes about it, which is confusing and weird to me. It's like they're acknowledging that it's nonsense, but they're still validating it with making it factual. That's a problem that I had with it. I love the self-awareness, and I like that they have that over the credits of like various radio stations talking about like what was Garrett Mazzy talking about. Like, it sounded like nonsense. I appreciate that because it is 100% nonsense.
Yeah, and I love that it's such a special moment in the movie, but recontextualized out of those two themselves, like, it's gobbledygook nonsense, you know?
It redeems it a little bit with the credits, but definitely in the moment, I was really frustrated with them. Like, I don't know why this is happening. Like, it's like they're trying to make a sincere, heartfelt, like, sacrificial moment out of this complete absurd bullshit, and that didn't work for me in the moment.
The self-awareness came from the main character feeling like what was going on was stupid, like was a dumb idea and nonsense. When they then fact check and then prove that is what's going on, the film is just telling me that their own concept is dumb.
It's dumb.
Like
yeah.
What? Like, why? Like, why would film do that?
Especially when it's been doing a great job before that of convincing me that its concept is not dumb.
Yeah, a great job.
Like,
a great job.
That's the thing. That's it.
Not only dumb, but a great concept.
It almost feels like self-sabotage a little bit. That's the way it came off to me. Not to take away from, once again, like, the really great build-up in the first two acts, because I think that it does set a really strong precedent, and it's probably why I'm mostly frustrated with the third act, is because it didn't live up to what I wanted it to be.
I think it ends appropriately bleak. Like, it's not a happy ending when they just bomb the radio station and everyone dies, you know?
Right. It feels a little bit undeservedly triumphant, but I do like that they just kill the characters right after that.
Yeah, and that their message doesn't make it through because they said gobbledygook. Even though, like, they were cogent, they were sentient, and they had just explained what the virus was to each other. There was nothing stopping him from explaining what the virus was over the radio.
Yeah, she just says there's no time for a list, so then he just starts listing alternatives for random words.
Yeah. Like, it's literally the least ineffective way to do it. Yeah. And he's proven him, like, they've all proven themselves, like, to have logic through this situation. And also, he is a communicator by trade. It makes literally no sense to me why he couldn't actually just explain what he had already just explained 5 minutes ago. It doesn't make any sense.
I think what was being attempted there is less him trying to explain what to do to survivors and trying to directly influence people who were succumbing to the virus at the time. Changing the words specifically. I don't know if it was conveyed super well. He was essentially doing the kill his kiss thing to
the people outside.
Yeah.
I can dig on that somewhat, but I feel like you can do both. Like,
See,
because
but I
all you
don't
have to
thi-
say is it's a mind virus. Like, you get caught in a feedback loop, and then just start listing off those things or something. But that's literally all you have to say.
That takes away time to de-emphasize more words. Like, the whole point was to get as many words off as possible, to decontextualize as many words, to get as many trigger words as possible.
But there's like thousands and thousands of words. Like, that's futile. Whereas, like, explaining to other people how to solve the problem could prevent the global outbreak.
Again, he wasn't doing it to survivors, though. He was trying to decontextualize it to stop it from spreading more to people who are succumbing to it right outside.
The people right outside are being bombed, though.
That's true. I mean, people in the rural area, you know?
They both serve the same purpose. It just one is way more effective. Like, if you explain to all the other people who have not succumbed yet how to cure it, as opposed to just trying to cure it single-handedly, you're going to do it. Also, like, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of words. It's futile. Just explain it. Like, just say, like, what's wrong, what is affecting all these people, and then try to do it. Like, for all the same reasons. Because, again, if you're just trying to cure those singular people, you're going to fail, and he does, because of a stupid reason. It's problematic to me.
I think him saying it's a mind virus would have been even cornier, though.
That's not what I said. Saying it's a feedback loop, the virus is being spread by that. And the film has already said that, and it was corny. And that's the problem.
Right. That's the root.
That's the root of the issue.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like,
if the movie had taken...
So if that wasn't the thing, or if the thing was slightly more complex than that, it... You know,
if the movie had gone the route that would have satisfied me to begin with, it wouldn't have ended.
We wouldn't be here at all.
It wouldn't have ended with
very true
with the kill is kiss thing, and then them going on the radio and listing out alternative words. They explaining the premise and making it sound silly is the catalyst that led to all of that. So, like, go back to the start and don't do that, and then do something better. I don't know what, but
I mean, just like recontextualize, like, the virus, like
tell less, show more. It would be great
like,
to have them.
If it's an actual virus.
I don't want them to literally show more, though.
Oh,
you know,
no.
like the charm of this is having single location. You know,
That's not what I mean.
No, yeah.
I mean show more in your world building. That doesn't necessarily mean show more outside the world, but give us more physical evidence that we can put the pieces together ourselves, rather than having convenient exposition dump character. I don't want that. Like,
I think they do so much of that, though. You know, whether it's the old granny, and then they talk later about hearing stuff about U-boats, or, you know, the Ken Loney stuff.
Right, and that's my point. All of that stuff is awesome. Stick the landing by carrying that on to a satisfying conclusion, instead of undercutting all of that really good world building that they do beforehand by just explaining everything and then having it lead to a nonsensical ending. All of the stuff you're listing is the stuff that I love about the movie, and I wanted it to end the way that it was going, because I think that would have been a much more powerful, satisfying film.
Yeah, for me, it could go either way. Like, I could see it either just being recontextualized, or same premise and just not explained. But, or if you just changed it a little bit and had it be there is an actual virus, and it is activated that way, or something.
I mean, it is activated with a word.
Yeah, but they always present it as like it's being carried by that. It seems it's goofy.
It has its own set of rules, and it's very unique. Once again, I think it's a tricky one here because it's so esoteric that, you know, if you're not getting it by 2/3 into the movie, I don't think it's too insulting to anyone's intelligence to explain it a little bit more. And I don't think it's excessively... They do some intelligent things with the Doctor to make it a little less exposition dumpy, mostly in that he's discovering it in the moment with them. And I mean, he doesn't truly understand it either.
Dump, but yeah.
Like, well, I mean, how the exposition dump is executed is important. And I don't think it's just him knowing everything right out the gate. you know, there is a point of discovering that character, and that makes it a little more forgivable in the movie because it's not just, oh, Deus Ex Machina, suddenly it all makes sense.
I mean,
know,
that is worse, yes.
They do things to mitigate it, is all I'm saying, in that, you know, like, I don't think the doctor character, while he is a little over the top and while it is very direct in his placement in the movie, I don't think it's insulting to anyone's intelligence to have him in there.
It's
serving that purpose.
It wasn't my intelligence that was insulted. It was that the concept was presented to me in a way that gave me fear. And by holding a flashlight to it and showing me what it actually is, which is a high concept goofy thing, it takes the fear away from me. That's not why I want to watch a horror movie. I want to watch a horror movie to be scared. And it was doing such a good job of that. If I'm trying to get a bead on what this concept is, and I think I know what it is, but I'm not totally sure what it is, I still don't have a full grasp of it, and it's scary. But as soon as you shine a light on it, you lose the fear. And that was the moment for me where that dissipated.
It's still weird because I think that's an argument to be made with very high concept stuff like this, but like when it's any other type of creature feature horror movie, you know, like if we know the concept, it can still be very scary, you know. It's a weird line to ride, and I think it's because this movie is so high concept that, like, I agree that over-explaining it can be a little problematic, but I think, again, it's a tricky line because I feel like you kind of need to explain a little bit of it.
I think it is a tricky line. I think that the film does cross it. I think it barely does, but it does, like, for me. Like, it is a hard line to walk, and they almost walk it.
Yeah,
and for me, that I almost find more frustrating because they almost did walk it, which can, in some cases, be less frustrating than when a film steps well over the line and just biffs it, you know, from the start or whatever else. Like, I usually don't care as much, but like when a film has me, you know, like,
yeah,
and like it just I felt a little let down by it. So like I think that's why I'm taking it almost kind of personally, like in that, and I should step back away from the film some.
Well,
but
no, I think in that respect it does feel a little bit insulting to my intelligence because it was doing such a good job of making me feel clever in tantalizing me with the pieces of information that I needed to figure it out.
And what a perfect environment to do that with, too. Great setting.
Then when it just drops the ball, it feels like it's saying, I don't think you were actually smart enough to really figure out what we were trying to say.
So we'll just dump the information.
We'll just tell you. And that is, it's like, well, no, I was working my way there. I almost got it, you know? Like, that is, in the sense, insulting my intelligence.
I feel like at some point, though, you do have to explain what it is, especially if you're going into the third act with trying to find a solution to the virus by decontextualizing words. You have to explain that words are the cause of this rather than just having beacons.
Yeah, but you
know?
But you can do that by showing it rather than by telling it. Say you take two characters, one of them becomes infected, starts repeating a word over and over again. You start to see that. And then one of the other characters starts repeating the same word and then maybe switches to a different word. And you see that it is the transmission of the words themselves and the feedback loop that is creating this altered state of mind. That's how you show it, and it's like, oh, okay, it's a mind virus. It's translated by something. I might not understand it fully, but I get that it has something to do with language and that it infects the mind, and it's not like a bacteria or a virus or something, you know, it's something higher form. Then you can figure that out on your own. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. I might not understand everything behind it, but that's okay. I get it enough to follow the story and figure out what's going on. And they don't do that. And that's where I do find it a little bit insulting. And it's like, I understand there's a line and some people won't pick up on stuff like that. But as a filmmaker, at a certain point, you have to decide, like, how far do I want to dumb down my film, especially if it's high concept. Like, do you choose to, like, stay true and, like, let the high concept work itself out, and maybe some people just won't get it? Or do you dumb it down and alienate the people who were enjoying having something a little bit more subtle that was being, like, fed to them like a trail of breadcrumbs rather than on a big fucking spoon, you know? And it is a line, and I think that, for me, they fell on the wrong side of that line and dumbed it down too much.
Halfway into the film. Yeah. Mechanically, like, they were setting me up to think that they weren't going to do that.
Right.
Like,
See, and
because again, it is the perfect environment for that. Like, it's that world-to-world situation. Like,
you only
they're getting
you're
fed information
from outside. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't know what you can and can't trust because you're not experiencing any of it firsthand. Mm-hmm. You're in sort of, like, they call it even a dungeon. You know, it's an underground radio station basement. Like, that's such a perfect, like, sealed, insular location.
Like, just keep me there. Like,
Yeah.
and I'd be more than willing to forgive the film for not following through an exposition, because we're not here for that. We're here for the character story. We're here for these people and what happens to them during this event. Like most zombie films, a lot of films don't explain the outbreak, like, for that same reason. And if you can just be there with those characters and you know, see whether or not they get through the events as they try and understand it, you know, and it might be beyond their grasp, and they might not have all of the context in that environment, then just don't give them the context. It's like otherwise it feels like the plot needing to move on its own.
And here's the thing, because I've seen this movie several times, and that section really does not bother me very much. And I wonder if it's because I've seen it so many times, because I feel like some of it is the twist of not having all of those clues in, rather than knowing what you're going in for and seeing the bits and pieces of it revealed as they come, and knowing the premise.
I agree. I agree that watching a film multiple times will almost always give you fresh context and perspective. And you might be right. If I watch this movie a few more times, that moment might bother me less. The problem is, if it's something that bothers me egregiously on the first watch, I'm much less likely to go back and watch it again. It's the kind of thing where, like, if I was, like, hanging out with people and somebody put on Pontypool, I would watch it, and I might get that contextual stuff from it and be like, oh, you know, I didn't look at this the right way the last time, you know, now I kind of see what they're going for. But the problem is, like, I'm not feeling like I want to sit down and watch this movie again because I was so frustrated by the third act.
Yeah, and again, a film that is designed to drip feed you information in a thriller environment where you are supposed to slowly figure out what is going on based around, like, information decontextualized. The first viewing is the most important one.
This is somewhat of an unfair comparison, but I want to make it anyway. Is, like, Tarkovsky is really good at doing what I wanted this movie to do. If you look at, like, a handful of his films, like Stalker, for example, Ben, you and I just watched that recently. They never really explain what the zone is at all. We see what it does to people who are there. We can get an idea about some of its rules based on the character's actions, based on what the stalker is doing to keep his two charges safe. You know, but even by the end of it, we're not much closer to understanding what the zone actually is.
And how much more terrifying is it for that?
Does that make the film less satisfying? And he does the same thing with Solaris. Like, what is really going on aboard that ship? We have some idea.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I appreciate films that are ambiguous or obtuse, you know? But I think the exposition was kind of necessary for the arc of the Mazzy character to make him feel like he's having some sort of redemption, even if it is futile in the end. It completes the arc of the character.
It could be.
in an important way.
That could be true.
You know,
I think you could do it similarly with him just trying to put the pieces together from the context of the stuff he's seen, and I think it would make him his.
The arc would have been more gratifying if he'd done it himself.
It would have made him much more unreliable at the end when he does go into the booth and give his nonsense address. It would feel a little bit more like a crazy person just like Alex Jones
Right.
rambling.
That's exactly
If we saw him putting together the pieces from the limited amount of information that he had received, and then I think it would be spookier too, because it's like, I still don't really know the exact details of this mind virus. Is he infected by the virus? Is that why he's rambling this nonsense on the radio? Has he become infected by it from trying to figure out what it is and failing?
This is
or
exactly why
succeeding?
earlier I was saying I feel like the film would have succeeded much better for me if I had viewed it with that single doctor sequence cut. Because I personally didn't have a huge problem with the killer's kiss thing. I didn't have a problem
I thought it was
with.
so goofy.
I thought it was goofy I thought it was goofy with the doctor's context, but I feel I would have felt it to be much less goofy without that context, because those characters would have been much more alienated. It would have felt with him just fumbling and trying anything he could, and then it would have been a much better epiphany moment of it actually working. But with the doctor having given him that information beforehand, it took away from that. And that's my point. If that had just been cut, that's all it would have taken for me, I think. And then the rest would have felt like, oh, was it him spiraling out, or did he have it right? We don't know. Ooh, that's gratifying. And that's all it would have taken for me.
Yeah. And I think there's definitely approaches they could have taken to make that more feasible. And you get hints of it throughout earlier in the movie. They have the warning signal in French that cuts in.
Oh, I love that.
That's
That's such a good part, because it ends. I love how the end of the message says "Do not translate."
Yeah.
Instead of starting the message with,
Yeah.
do not translate this.
What a great fuck you moment. I loved that.
I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, it's fantastic. They could have, done more with stuff like that to kind of get them to speak French a little bit, because the way they do it now is just through the doctor.
Yeah, he's just it's only transmitted through the English language.
Yeah.
Okay, why?
Okay, cool. Yeah,
I think that there are ways that they could have handled it a little bit more cleverly that wouldn't have felt quite so dumbed down for me. I do think that that being said, there are a lot of really great things about this film, and I am always more frustrated with a film when I like it until the end.
I love how the majority of the horror, essentially, scenes that we get are just audio retellings
Yeah,
of
it's
what's
great.
happening. It
It's
leaves
fantastic.
so much to the imagination.
I love that.
I agree with that to the extent that I also want to kind of go back and say I don't know why I was defending the new Pet Cemetery so much, for all the same reasons. We talked about it on the podcast. It's like, yeah, no, I dig that. I dig that hard. A lot of cool moments. The intro, him driving along the road with the cell phone is nice. I kept waiting for his car to crash. They build tension quite well.
Well, you get the first infected when he stops at the station.
Yeah, does she say anything?
She does, but he can't hear it because his windows are rolled up.
Because she's seeking. Yeah.
And then
Very
she
cool,
and then
yeah.
she wanders off. Yeah,
That's right.
Recontextualizing that stuff is really cool because they make.
Oh, you know what? Fuck yeah! You know what? It's really fucking
he
rad too.
makes
Because
a point about saying she was sounded like she was ranting something, but I couldn't hear what she said.
Yeah. Well, also during that sequence when he rolls the window down, he shouts out, and there's an echo effect that doesn't sound like him, and it's people out
Yeah.
there.
They're just
That's
repeating
fucking
it.
great.
Yeah, and they do a lot of that very subtly too.
Yeah, that stuff is great. That's the level of subtle I want.
They
yeah.
like Ken Loney talks about them chanting things, and
Yeah.
in reality, that's just repeating things. We have that fantastic scene where Laurel Ann begins babbling, and the tea kettle goes off.
Oh yeah, and she imitates the
kettle.
The tea kettle.
Yeah, and it transitions to her doing that very well. God, what an audiophile stream. Like this movie is just so delicious to my ear holes. I like the lead's voice, just all the Foley play. It's great. It's great.
I saw that the writer and the director are like, yeah, this is a zombie movie, but they're not called zombies. We call them conversationalists.
Oh my god!
See, it's God if that isn't my problem with this film. God if that isn't my problem with it. Yeah,
But,
that's what I mean, man. Don't.
I mean, I like that they're trying to do something
don't.
different, But
No,
Please do. I encourage it.
I 100% appreciate the originality.
Yeah,
it's definitely the freshest take on zombies I've seen in a long time.
And
even
honestly,
high concept shit.
It's one of
I
the
love high
best.
concept.
In my opinion, it's one of the best zombie movies in the last 10 or 20 years. Just because we haven't had that many good ones. In fairness,
it's been a very low bar.
But it's up there for me, just because of how original it is and how much mileage they get out of drip feeding you and kind of the limited perspective.
Yeah, the conversationalist thing almost makes me feel like the writer and director are a little bit too self-satisfied with how clever they were, and that might explain why they dumbed it down, because I could very well see them being like, yeah, man, this is really great stuff, but, I don't know if people will get how cerebral this is, man. Like, I don't know if they'll be able to get it. We should probably just have somebody explain it at some point, because people who watch the movie aren't smart enough like us. Allegedly. That's complete conjecture. But the conversationalist thing gives me that kind of vibe from them. They're not zombies, they're conversationalists.
Well, I know this is based on a book. I wonder if the doctor is in there.
I'd be curious to see how much they explain.
Because the books are just such a great medium for like exploring like the dissemination of information in ways that film in some cases can't do.
Well,
it comes to like tracking data, and I'd be very keen to see this in novel form, also radio play form.
Well, yeah, like we mentioned before, this is also a radio play,
and it's shorter.
It probably translates really well. I think honestly, this is a story where I think it probably translates best to a form with audio, just because there's that directness.
Probably,
written word is always going to give you some subtext and some extra information, but when the concept
and also it can send you down more rabbit holes.
Yes,
as well. And this film loved to do that in a lot of cool ways. And I tend to like books that do that. House of Leaves, Illuminatus, things like that. Like I like being thrown down those just those mazes of letters. And trying to just being sometimes wild goose chases that in some cases don't even lead anywhere. Like that. Yeah, that
House
can be
of
really
Leaves
fun.
does that really well.
Oh yeah, it's a labyrinth. And this film almost was. Like it almost was that. But I'm repeating myself.
Yeah. I'm good to rate this unless y'all have other points you want to bring up.
Yeah, I'm pretty much good to rate it.
Why don't you start, since it was your choice?
Again, this was the Pontypool Defense Hour. I really love this movie. I think it's super inventive. They do so much with so little in this movie. My last couple picks have also been kind of minimalistic horror. But I think
you went from Bug to Pontypool, both.
Well, Bug
location.
to Cube to Pontypool.
To Cube to Pontypool,
which is also
right.
minimal.
You can call Cube a single location.
Yeah,
so.
It definitely is, and it's definitely a minimalistic horror movie. But I think the reason why I love minimalistic horror so much is it leaves so much to the imagination and leaves so much unknown. And I know that's your guys' biggest problem ultimately, is where that ends up taking us. But I think still it's very inventive. The dialogue is super sharp. McHattie gives a great performance. What a great radio voice. And I think overall it's really well done. I've seen this movie several times and have shown it to several people, and it's always a very divisive movie. Some people are like, this should just be a radio play. Other people are like, this is amazing. So it's always a toss-up. And I've seen people who got the twist right away and others who did not. So it's always interesting to see new perspectives on that. Overall, I'm going to give this a 4.5 out of 5. I think it's really great. I'm a little bummed that you guys didn't like it quite as much, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, the reason I'm so frustrated with it is because I was liking it so much, and I felt a little betrayed by the turn the third act took. Also, just because I felt the third act is where it sort of devolved into more of what I would expect from a zombie film, still with a creative twist, and I very, very much appreciate that originality. I love the idea of the mind virus. I love the idea of zombies as like little individual radio antennas that are just trying to transmit and receive signals.
Fucking cool.
I think that's a very, very cool premise. I love the minimal setting. I thought the performances were great. I don't know, honestly, if I would or wouldn't say that this would be better as a radio play. I think all of the story aspects you can get across without any visuals, but having a little bit of the visual setting, I think, is helpful.
Quite.
In sort of especially with like all the winter stuff, and they're talking how much they're talking about winter and how much Mazzy hates the cold and stuff. So
It claustrophobic, you know,
yeah,
for sure.
it's definitely more claustrophobic.
And like the facial reactions and like all the little ticks that come from the characters, like in between the words.
Yeah,
You know?
I think it's good. I wish I wasn't so disappointed with the third act, because I really thought it was going strong and could have really fucking scored a touchdown there, but kind of dropped the ball at the last minute. That being said, still overall a solid film with a lot of things that I really enjoyed, and I think it's a good example of minimalist storytelling, especially in a high concept setting. Just don't dumb it down. Just stick with it. I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 5.
So, Ben, you brought up an excellent point by comparing it to Cube. I'm really glad you brought that up, because Cube ends without you ever knowing who, what, when, where, or why. Like, you know what is Cube, and that's it. Yet the film still has a complete arc to it and leaves you very satisfied with the character walking off, you know, into the light. That's a solid comparative. No, I agree with Tease that it works great as a film. I had no complaints about that. And I feel as well that it is a concept that could work quite well in those other forms that we discussed, you know, radio play or novel form or novella. Like, there are a lot of neat things you can do with that concept across multiple media. The one doctor scene, just cut it out of the movie. Literally everything else I adored. And even that was not too bad, because again, you have the main character kind of being self-aware about it. Like, I'm going to give it a 4. Like, I enjoyed the shit out of it. And again, like, God, the first 2 acts are rad. They are great.
Yeah.
They are
Really
rad.
good,
And
It leaves so much to the imagination.
and too, like, yeah, again, like, I like wacky concepts. I like high concept shit. It's just, it is a tightrope walk on how you deliver it. And I think it does slip.
Sure.
And on the tightrope, I think you can slip and fall to your death. And I don't think they did that. I think that they just slipped and they caught themselves. But, you know, it did harm the act. And for that, you know, I think a 4 is solid.
Yeah, I think that's great. One point I want to make before we wrap up here, get to the sponsor, obviously, is
That money.
What sponsor?
is I wanted to compare this just to a second with a more recent movie that I think did this, but they executed it better with a sort of exposition dump, is the movie Us. Which I thought was excellent.
Okay.
But the first scene where Red appears with the family and kind of explains what's going on really explains a lot of things to make it less high concept in some ways. The thing I think that helps with that is how
things
they
help with
twist
that.
again with it. You know,
Yeah.
it twists upon itself.
It does. Also, like, the delivery is given to you, like, so beautifully stylistically. Like, the choice of having, like, Red narrate the whole thing like this is fucking spooky. Like, and
I think-
yeah, it is an exposition dump, but
I think
on top of that,
also-
it is a narration, like, and it is telling you a story also to something that is, in that case, even more high concept.
And there's
there's no way you could
a
track
degree
down
of-
and break down what was actually happening until that is explained to you.
There's a degree of obscurity to her exposition dump as well. It does lay
She's still
out
poetic about it.
lay out a lot of stuff, but it does it in such a way where it's not 100% on how often she's being completely literal, because she gives it as sort of as like a fable or a fairy tale. You know, she begins it with like once upon a time. So it's like there's some other things. I think that Us is a good example of how you deliver exposition without it feeling like they're spoon feeding things to you.
Well, and the thing I like about the way it's executed in Us is it's definitely an exposition dump. But I think the thing is with it, you don't have to overthink the things that are explained, so you can think about other things.
Yeah.
And it twists upon itself after that in such a way that you're still leaving some unknowns.
You're still leaving some unknowns, and also the concept is so high and so nuanced and complex. In Us, there is a certain degree of depth that you can continue to read into with that film, even though it is a fantasy concept at the end of the day that you cannot fully take apart literally. There is still a degree of world building beneath what we see and what is delivered even in that exposition that it still allows me to continue to play in that mentally and to question the film. Also, it is delivered so effectively, like, and stylistically, which is why you brought it up for sure. And again, the film doesn't give you enough information to tie it together. So because there's not really any other way to deliver that information because it is so whack. So when I have that information delivered to me in that film, I'm not mad about it because there's no way I could have come to that conclusion myself because that's insane. You know, so I don't feel robbed in that sequence.
That's fair. That's fair.
You know, I feel overwhelmed by how strange of an idea it is. And this film could have done that too. Like, you know, like just a few more tweaks. You know, like it could have done that.
Well, check out our review on Us. Listen to that already.
Hell yeah.
We delve into that a lot more.
Such a good film.
And that'll give Pontypool an average rating of 3.8 out of 5 pods. Check it out. Let us know what you think. And before we wrap up, it's time for a word from our sponsor. Who's our sponsor this week, Cleve?
Yeah, our sponsor this week is you ever you gotta do you ever what do you think? Do you ever have trouble starting a sentence? Fortunately, we have our sponsor has solved that problem. If you ever have trouble starting a sentence, just say that your sponsor can do it for you, and they'll complete it, and then you've had a sponsor. Our sponsor this week was that
Pontypool.
Yep.
And I'm actually looking at the copy that Cleveland has been reading, and it says exactly what he just said.
Yeah, man. Like, so I don't make this shit up. Like,
I don't think our sponsor is using their own product.
I think our sponsors lost their fucking mind. That was nonsense that I just said.
Yeah, that was complete garbage.
Like, it restarts like 4 times. Like, it doesn't go anywhere by the end of it. It just says our sponsor is the sponsor itself. That's really hack, honestly. Like,
hey, the money's in our bank account and we're getting fucking dirty rich, boys.
Yeah, that's all that matters is that they paid.
Right.
So I'll read the copy every time. But
if you pay us,
even if it's nonsense that makes me sound like I wasn't planning, ridiculous.
If you pay us, we'll read anything.
Oh, anything.
All right. Well, that'll bring us to the end of this week's episode. Next week is Child's Play?
Yeah, original versus
remake. I was not super certain about the new one, but after seeing a couple of previews, I'm kind of on board. I'm curious.
I am very excited only because I love the original series. I think they're super fun across that franchise. And I know we're only going to watch the first one in the remake, so we won't get the full breadth of this.
The first one's the only one I've seen, but I'm excited to see it
over
again.
the course of that series, it goes in a very similar way to like Nightmare on Elm Street, where it goes from horror to comedy over the course of the series in a great inventive way. I'm just super excited to see see the original again, and hopefully the new one is good. I know we bet on it, so
I hope so. That will be the deciding film in our mid-year catch-up. Whoever accurately predicted Child's Play at the end will have the choice of what 3 films we watch for our mid-year catch-up.
Yes.
So yeah, tune in next week for that. If you like the show, do the ding-dang thing and leave us...
I mean, if you're already here, right? Like,
yeah,
you like the show.
You're already here. You like the show, we hope, unless you like listening to something you hate, which...
It's also fine.
If you do, that's totally okay. But only if you like the show, leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Well, actually, if you don't like the show, also feel free to leave a 5-star rating.
Leave us a 5-star rating and review. That's also fine. Or, wherever else you get your podcasts, if there's a way to rate it, do it, please. Thank you. You can also follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod. I posted some Dark Crystal gifs there.
They were great. Thank you.
Yeah. You can also follow us on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/podpeoplepod for a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and the links to those episodes. So yeah, follow me on Twitter at Mr. Van Awesome.
I'm at Mr. Sheets.
I tweet for at Light Arc Studio, giving you all those cool screenshot Saturday posts from the game. Sometimes not on Saturdays.
And as promised, we do have an update on that.
Yeah!
It will now be officially released in early access on Steam on June 25th, which I think is just a few days after this airs.
Yes. We're coming. We're coming for you. We're on Steam.
If you went already from our last episode and looked for us and didn't find us, I'm sorry. We're working on it.
I'll send you an e-kiss.
All right. Well, thank you as always for listening. Child's Play next week. And until next time, this has been WPOD, the Pod Boys, sliding into your ears like slippery brain slugs and leaving our thoughts and opinions like mucus in your skull cavity.
I'm not comfortable with
Signing
this.
off!